Smarting, smart pen, smart paper equals smarter ideas. Hopefully I have everything running. We're trying something new here. We're going to be taking a look at a whole line of Cognitive Surplus papers. To do that, we're going to be using Noodler's Dark Matter ink because it's a smart ink. We're going to be using a Retro 51 ballpoint. It's the Einstein edition, a little worse for wear. A Lamy All-Star black with a fine nib, and a Noodler's Ahab because it is ridiculously wet. To start with, we need an order of operations with this because Cognitive Surplus has a lot of different papers that are going on. Lucky for us, one of the first things we're going to be looking at is order of operations. Order of operations, right here, we're going to start with this to-do list, which we have, except not that one, this one. So let's start out just simply by pointing out the back of the page is not going to be the same tone as the front of the page. If we just try to look at the papers, what we're going to see is it is obviously not a white paper. That means it is going to have some kind of an effect on the color of the paper that we get, or ink. Let's first just look at the back of the page to see what is going on. And what we're going to get to see here is that, it doesn't seem to handle fountain pens especially well. The ballpoint, which is going to be at the very top, seems to have done pretty good. Then we wind up with right here what's going to be the Lamy, then the bottom two lines here. This is the Noodler's Ahab. It seems to me like what you might want in this case is to stick with something like a ballpoint pen here. Now, if we just look for any kind of color changes, and I know we're dealing with a black ink, but I chose this. It does tend to have a slight green undertone. We see that the comparison between the two, it'll help if I fold that page back some for you, get that out of the way so we can see it directly side by side. We're getting no real color shift with the tone of the paper. I would expect that if this had been like a green or a yellow or perhaps an orange ink, it might be affecting this tone, even some of the turquoise. But in this case, I wanted to use a smart ink on smart paper. Now we need to know what we're studying. So we're going to start here with the Syllabus notebook. The Syllabus notebook is a kind of planner notebook for students, and I hope this is showing up here. This is not too bad. This is pretty good. I'm saying for students because I'm a nerd and a teacher. So I see that just for that. That's why Saturday, Sunday, share a day. But how does it handle the fountain pen ink, you say? Good question, I would answer. If we just look at the back of the page, we can see that it's not doing especially well when it comes to the wetter fountain pen. It did not do too bad when it was the Lamy, which was it's a medium flow. It's a regular flow pen. But the wet Ahab, not too good. When it came to the ballpoint, not a problem at all. So this is something to consider when you're taking a look at something like this. Do we get any kind of color shift when writing on the front of the page? And we don't get any color shift at all, not from the blue rollerball, not from the black ink that went down. Yes, I know that a color ink would have been better. I'm going to try to stop saying that, but I do realize that I just really like this ink. I think it generally did very well. I don't see any kind of major spread. I do see minor bits of feathering that go on here, like on paper or on the on the R of smarter. So there is a little bit. If you can deal with how it looks on the back, I think the way it looks on the front is pretty darn good. Up next is going to be the weekly planner. So this is a very interesting pad they have. I'd have to zoom way out in order to get it, but it's about an A5 size page, a little bit larger, and it's got a nice breakdown of the week and, nice little mathy, nerdy things along the top. I enjoy it. You don't have to, but I do. So that's why I went with this. I like that it has week of, and then it just works its way through all of that. Now, I wrote on a page, and looking at the back, we see a very similar situation, where with the fountain pens, it didn't do especially well, but it didn't bleed through touching the page underneath. It just gets very deep into the paper. Since this is not something you're really looking at using the back of the page of, this is doing pretty good. When we look at the writing itself, we're not getting any kind of color shift if we compare it to what's happening with the Clairefontaine. We don't see anything that's changing what's going on. We're getting all the same information. We have no spread. We have no feathering. I think this is a really good paper for this ink. Now, I don't know if that was intentional or not on their part, but I am going to say that while you can't write on the back of the page, because it'll get kind of messy back there. You don't have that problem with this. This is not really a right on the back of the page type of a thing. Yep, I hit me. Before we go any farther, what I really do want to point out is they have this really neat washi tape, and it matches the design of what's going on in the notebooks. And being the nerd, I went ahead and I picked that up so that I can use it with it and be all themey kind of thing. But I'm not a huge washi tape user. That does not mean that this is not going to be a lot of fun for me to use. So that's why I picked it up. Up next, we have the Hypothesis Notebook Series. Now, this is a dot grid paper. And if we look at the back, we know automatically this is not going to be a white paper, so I don't need to do that side by side. It does get a little bit deeper onto the paper with the fountain pens, meaning you probably don't want to be writing back here. But overall, none of it bled through touching the page underneath. Just as before, we're not getting any kind of tone shift really big, but we are getting the ink looking just a little bit lighter. Strange, I know. You can see it looks just a little bit lighter. Only if it's side by side would you even notice it with the black. Now, when it comes to the blue rollerball, I'm not seeing any kind of shift in what's happening, so I think it's doing perfectly good. But that's just a hypothesis. You know what we really need is to run an experiment. So we get the Experiment Notebook Series. We can see, looking at the back of the page, it still does get deeper into the paper. Never bleeds through to touch the page underneath. And if this wasn't such a wet pen, it probably wouldn't be a problem. Up here, I see the Lamy that's a medium flow does get a little bit deeper. Makes me feel like a drier flow pen might be the problem solver. Looking at the writing itself, we can see that it still looks the same. It doesn't have the same thing that just went on with the last paper where it looks slightly lighter, though I will say the rollerball looks slightly different. Not to say that it's huge in its difference, just that the difference is there. The black ink still looks like a black ink with no problem, no feathering, no spread, outstanding. You might need to jot an occasional note. And for that, we're going to look at the Notepad. Now, the Notepad follows that same great design feature all the way through. When it comes to the back of the page, nothing bled through, which is always good news. But as we should be expecting at this point, it does show through to the back of this page. The fact that it's not printed back here leads me to say that this is probably not something they're looking at writing on the back of the page for. It's just a front side kind of thing. We might let that go just a little bit. Looking at the writing itself, we see no change in the colors of what we're getting, and so it does still perform fairly well. There is some light feathering that goes on with ideas and with the MA in Smarter. Not too bad, though, and there's no real spread. While looking at these notebooks, you might want to really take some observations while on the go. And for that, they have the Observation Series, which are really nice, small notebooks. You know, it's funny when it comes to notebooks. I like notebooks to be really small or really big. If we just look at the back, we see it does get a little bit deeper into the paper when we're talking about From the Noodler's Ahab, which is a very, very wet pen. Now, on the Lamy, it did very well, and on the Rollerball, it did really well. When we look at the front of the page and the writing itself, we get no shift in colors, which is outstanding. We get no feathering. We get no spread. This is an absolute huge winner to me. I wish I had more of this particular notebook because these tiny little notebooks, I love them. Having your hypothesis and run some experiments and take in your observations, you might now want to do just a little bit of analysis over what it is that you've seen. And for that, we have the Analysis Notebook Series. When we look at the back of the page for these, we see that the ink still does get quite a bit deeper into the paper. Never bleeds through, never touches the page underneath, but not necessarily the best thing for fountain pens. Perhaps a very dry fine can help. The Rollerball seems to be having no problem. Looking at the front of the page, we see no real color shift as the pen changes. So the black inks are black inks, the blue inks are blue ink. More important, what I see on the front, regardless of the back in this case, it has no feathering and it has no spread. It just has my bad penmanship. Having done all of your analysis, you might be coming up with a theory now. For that, we have the Theory Notebook series from Cognitive Surplus. Looking at the back of the page, we have no bleeding, no ghosting. This right now has been doing outstanding, especially compared to a bunch of the others. Now, this paper itself is quite a bit lighter in tone than it was on the other papers, which is noticeable, especially when we put the Clairefontaine next to it. It is a very bright paper, though nowhere near as bright as the Clairefontaine, much brighter than it was with any of the other notebooks. We see that we get no tone shift of that. We don't bring out or suppress any of that little green undertone that this black ink has. The blue still looks like blue. We get no feathering, we get no spread, we have an outstanding performance. And just to throw a curveball in what is happening, we have the Helix, which doesn't fit in the line and order of the scientific method. But hey, you know, that's one of their series. The Helix Spiral Notebook series. Looking at the back of the page, we see that, you know, it did fairly well. Only a couple spots did it get a little bit deeper into the page. On the majority, it seems to be handling that ink very well. Obviously, nothing bled through to the page underneath, but we did get a little bit of spotting. Probably not enough to stop you from using it. Just don't go out of your way to use a gusher of a pen. When it comes to the writing itself, we see that we get no real tone shift of the ink that's on the paper. And we get no feather, no spread. In the end, I can say that I really do enjoy a lot of these notebooks. They're not my go-to on a lot of things. They are a little bit pricier, but I do think quality is worth it. And if you're a nerd in a subject the way I am, if you can have notebooks that really match your nerddom, it does make it a little bit better. And with matched notebooks to a subject, your student might enjoy that subject just a little bit more. By student, I mean your child. Get them a science-themed notebook for science, a math-themed notebook for math, an English-themed notebook for English. Take a look at the Cognitive Surplus line. They probably have a notebook for you. Now, I hope you got something out of this video, and thanks for watching.